CIA. The importance of this is that by rendering the leaders decimated and the communications, they did not have the command control communications to carry out what Israel feared most, all of us feared most, and that is sending thousands and thousands of missiles, rockets, and drones at Israel simultaneously and overwhelming the extraordinary air and ballistic missile defense of Iron Dome, David Sling, Arrow, Patriot, even THAAD. And without having to face that, all of a sudden Israel now could conduct the kind of intense, weeks-long air campaign that took them down from maybe 150,000 to probably somewhere around 10,000 or less. And every time one pops up now, they go after it and they don't have the means to use it. That, by the way, changed the dynamics dramatically in Lebanon. All of a sudden, they're able to elect a president after years of wrangling. They got a speaker for the parliament who's not the guy that the Hezbollah Shia-aligned group wanted. And the Lebanese armed forces, for the first time, are able to move into the area between the northern border of Israel and the Litani River so that they can keep Hezbollah out of it, we hope. And the Israelis will watch that very carefully. Go to the east from there, and you have this incredible serendipitous upheaval where HTS, formerly an al-Qaeda affiliate, but certainly a political Islam movement, decides to take one of the Aleppo. It falls, Hama, Homs, and the road to Damascus is open, and they took it, and all of a sudden you have a new regime there. Now, that is by no means consolidated. There's a little bit of an insurgency emerging from the old Assad supporters. You haven't sorted out how to deal with the Syrian Democratic Forces, the Kurds up in the northeast that the Americans helped build and support, how to integrate the other elements that are in there, the Syrian National Army, Free Syrian Army, and remnants and so forth. But it's a hugely positive development because Iran can no longer use the route they used to have from Iran through Iraq, through Syria down into southern Lebanon to resupply Hezbollah. So Hezbollah, having sustained enormous losses, is going to be very, very hard pressed to get back what it is that they had. They can get money into them by various means, including through Turkey and so forth, but they're not going to get the material. And Israel's watching it. They just did 30 airstrikes last night, in fact, to keep this out of southern Lebanon. So a hugely important development. Iraq bubbling along, worries about the Iranian-supported Shia militia, what kind of presence the U.S. can keep. Prime Minister, who I talk to at Munich every year, just was there, realizes how important it is for a U.S. element to stay not fighting, but supporting the Iraqi counterterrorism service in particular, who just took out a very important Islamic State individual in western Iraq. And then Iran. The second response by Israel to the second batch of strikes from Iran saw the Israelis use the F-35 against the S-300 from Russia and did enormous damage to it. Also did enormous damage to the solid fuel rocket factory, which used to produce 3 engines a day and is now down to 1 or 2 a week. So that dramatically limits the Iranians in that regard. And it shows something very important to someone who was a U.S. Central Command commander when we developed the plan to destroy the Iranian nuclear program, always the worry about how formidable is the air defense, particularly once Russia started providing it. And so that's a very encouraging sign. I think Iran will not develop or will not enrich to weapons grade, but if they do, the U.S. and Israel have been very clear repeatedly, but this president, also President Trump, I was heartened to hear him say he will not allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon, and I'm confident that we have the means to detect it and also to destroy that program. So now you come back to Gaza. Rightly, I think Prime Minister Netanyahu set out 3 objectives, given what Hamas had just done, just barbaric what it was they carried out on 10/7. Destroy Hamas. That's a very significant task. And frankly, Israel has not achieved it. They have degraded Hamas very, very considerably. They're no longer organized combat effective companies, battalions, brigades, but they still have the same numbers. They're just now essentially guerrillas or insurgents. Keep Hamas from governing again. Well, Hamas is still, in as much as there is governance in Gaza. I mean, who is it, after all this, deciding which hostages get released, distribute the humanitarian assistance? It's guys with guns, and the most guns are in the hands of Hamas, who are still roughly about the numbers that they had before, nowhere near as capable. And because Israel rightly has taken control of the southern border the so-called Philadelphia corridor, Iran cannot get the replacement weapons, ammunition, explosives, and all the rest of that through the Rafah crossing or under the tunnels that go underneath that southern border. And they should never give that up. And yet that's a condition that Hamas will have for, quote, ending the war. And then to get the hostages back, have gotten a number of hostages back without question. And the more that can be done to do that before you return to the task of destroying Hamas, the better. But they're never going to get all of them back, because the conditions for particularly the military-age males, former soldiers, and so forth will be it'd be completely prohibitive for the Israeli government. And I would submit there should be a fourth objective, and this is very, very important. It should be to provide a better life for the Palestinian people in Gaza without Hamas in their lives. Now, the only way you can achieve that is by clear hold-build transition. What you face in Hamas now is an insurgency. It is not organized companies, battalions, brigades, as I said, and yet Israel is largely doing what we call clear and leave operations, which is, by the way, what we were doing in Iraq prior to the surge, when we realized that, yes, we'd kill a lot of bad guys, we'd destroy their infrastructure, but the moment we left or handed it off to Iraqi forces that couldn't hold it, the bad guys recruited more, and they came right back. And so you have to clear and hold. And the big idea of the surge, in fact, was to do just that and use gated communities, because you have to stay there and you have to have real security. The way to do it, and I did, you asked me, I advised, Yoav Gallant will tell you that he and I had very deep conversations. I would submit, I don't ask the ambassador, who I know is here, how it was that his job was lost at a certain point, but my sources tell me, and an old intelligence guy, that it was because he was trying to get a political end state laid out for, like I'm talking about, achieving. So how would you do it? That's the question. Start in the north, bite size. Come in a kilometer south, put an east-west wall. 8 miles is all it is. We used to throw that much wall up in multiple locations in Iraq every night. Texas barriers are called. A couple of north-south walls, so you have 3 gated communities. We used to tell the Iraqis you pay a lot of money for a gated community in Florida, and we're giving it to you for free. And then the Israelis go in and do what only they can do. Arab forces are not going to do this. No one's going to go in. Palestinians won't do it. They're not going to go in and fight, would be seen fighting for Israel against fellow Arabs, even if they are Hamas, which I think, by the way, has to be assessed to be the equivalent of the Islamic State. These are not reconcilable. Maybe some junior ranks are, maybe the chameleons in the ranks, but you have to kill or capture the bulk of Hamas. They, again, are the equivalent of Islamist extremists that cannot be reconciled. So you come in, you clear that. Now, by the way, once you have security, every building, floor, room, tunnel, and so forth, biometric ID cards for the Palestinians who are allowed to be in these areas. You want to get them back in the neighborhood of their houses, many of which, of course, are destroyed, if not most, and then get them in better shelter. But now you can bring in all of the NGOs of the world. You can have contractors come in and thin out the Israelis and perform security duties, because now it's just sort of basic policing. You can have, again, the Arab countries have said they'll come in, but they're not going to go in if you haven't destroyed Hamas. Repeat, repeat, repeat. I don't want to make light of this and say that this is vastly more difficult by orders of magnitude than anything that we did all together in Iraq. We never faced 350 miles of tunnel, underground infrastructure, huge support from outside, et cetera. But that's the way you'd have to do it, and it's going to get tough as you get closer and closer to Rafah, and you're going to have the penultimate big fight, but you will have then destroyed Hamas, and you will prevent them from reconstituting. And if you don't do that, you cannot achieve the first 3 objectives completely, as much progress as Israel has made and as impressive as some of their work has been, much less that 4th one that I believe should be added.
Thank you. It's very interesting to hear you speak, and it's a very powerful argument. But of course, for much of the rest of the world, people are looking at this very differently. They're looking at in terms of the number of Palestinians who have been killed. Was this an approach that has been either necessary or effective when weighed against the cost of human lives? So it sounds like you're saying that strategically it hasn't been fully the right approach in any case. But I guess very quickly I want to ask you, and then we'll come back to you. You know, a lot of the focus right now from the United States, from Egypt, from other, and I guess the greater public will is for the conflict to end, for there to be some sort of ceasefire. In your assessment, is that now, based on what you've just said, premature?
Well, I'd love to see it end, but you have to achieve objectives to have an end. So you'd have to destroy Hamas, get Hamas out of the governing business completely, get all the hostages back. And again, that's going to be tough, but the only way you're going to do it is, and make life better. By the way, the Europeans have been highly critical of the Israelis, I think sometimes overdoing it. When you're going against targets that are 100 feet down, you have to use very substantial munitions. And I think I'm very cautious to second guess. I had lots of people second guess me during the surge in Iraq and Afghanistan and everything else. And I always wished they'd come out and actually sit beside me for a few days and understand what it was that we were dealing with. But in this case, again, I think if the Europeans heard an Israeli commitment that we, not only do we want to destroy Hamas, keep them from governing and get back our hostages, we actually want to provide a better life. And by the way, then you start the processes of fixing the education system, stop teaching young Palestinians that Israelis are the devils and so forth. I mean, I can guarantee that if you don't do this, the prospect of Palestinians living in Gaza alongside Jews in Israel peacefully is probably a tall order.
Thank you. Eden, I'm going to come to you. Can you give us your assessment of, in your own role, you obviously have been working for Israel for your entire career, presumably. What is the end state? What is the objective in Lebanon, in Syria, in Gaza? And do you think that it is, how would you respond both to what you've just heard, and how would you map out what the direction of travel is?
Good morning. First of all, General Petraeus described for you the real facts on the ground, a very clear, realistic analysis of the situation. We're both sorry that reality doesn't conform always good intention and some illusions that were among the elites worldwide that thought that good intentions can assure you positive results. I don't have many things to add to General Petraeus' analysis, accurate analysis, but I would like to emphasize and underline certain principles that are not yet on the table of discussions, important discussions like this one. First of all, in order to solve a problem, you have to define what is the underlying problem. What are the roots of the problem? And I think that once everybody ignored it, it's very easy to choose, I would say, easy solutions, but not realistic one. Remember how many decades there are trials and errors, and nobody is stopping for a second and asking himself, why? Why it didn't work? And there is a simple explanation we just don't want to accept. There is a huge difference between radicals and moderates. And the radicals cannot be negotiated in terms of ending something, solutions. Radicals, they have the will, they are building capacity, and they are looking for opportunity. Now, once you want to address that, you need to ask, how do you address the problem of radicalization? And this is something that cannot be solved overnight, cannot be solved by signing a symbolic agreement on a paper that doesn't reflect the reality of a society, its leaders, intentions, plans. And I think it's very hard, mostly for Westerners, and we Israelis, we did a terrible mistake, as General Petraeus said, and we have to be honest and to admit that we made a terrible mistake by misreading the situation. We thought that economy, incentives, improving lives of the people in Gaza will bring us certain prosperity, peace, stability. Israel is out of the Gaza Strip in 2005. So it's 2 decades that Israel is out of Gaza Strip. But what we saw that every contribution made by the West, the international community, any contribution made by taxpayers in Europe, United States, and elsewhere, went into building capacities of terror that ends in awful massacre. But there is a will, capacity, and opportunity. We provided 2 out of the 3. We provided the means by injecting money, supplies, everything into Gaza for so many years. And we also were blind and provided the opportunity. Willing, if you are not dealing with this factor, you'll never get a result in any radical. It doesn't matter if it's in that part of Asia or our part of Asia. Radicalism must be addressed by de-radicalization, which is a long, long, long process, starting with kindergarten, schools, culture, media, religion institutions. And if you see that in the area, you can see that there are societies in the Middle East that chose to go to the moderate direction, and some are on the radical. And you don't have one solution for all or one cure for all. You have to be realistic and addressing, first of all, you need to analyze with whom you are dealing with. So with the radicals, we have to do two things. First of all, we need to eliminate I would say the leadership and the fighting forces.
Even beyond that,
I'm going to make sure that we get to.
Okay, so I'll be brief. I'll be brief. One more minute, please. And so first of all, after the process of General Petraeus just described, you need to really ask for a process of de-radicalization, but it takes time. And between now and I would say the future of the area, you will need to do disarmament of that particular area. Now, about Lebanon, you see the opposite. You see that the Lebanese government is moving to the moderate. We encourage the international community to support the Lebanese government, the Lebanese army. We think that this is the real point, that there is I would say, optimism at the end of the tunnel. There is a light in the end of the tunnel. The international community should encourage the moderate government.
And we and others in the Middle East need to support that more than we have been.
Thank you, General.
But that's all consistent.
So it's been very helpful and useful and interesting to hear both of your views, and we're going to come to Abla. I will say that we all know that the conversation about the Middle East, about Gaza, is very different in different parts of the world. I can tell you that where I sit, this is not the tenor of the conversation. There's a much greater focus on the cost of the human cost of the strategy, especially for Palestinians. And there is a question as to how do you evaluate the strategy, not only in terms of the singular objective that you've put out there, but in terms of the cost to human lives. And as you know very well, there are many people who contest the idea that you can eliminate Hamas. So it is a question that is debated by very, very serious people. Abla, I'm going to come to you. The panel is really wanting to talk also very much about economic and political reconciliation. It seems like the implication, I hope I'm not putting words into the first two speakers' mouths. It seems like the implication of what we've heard so far is that it's not yet the moment to talk about economic and political reconciliation. I think others, clearly we know from reading the news, others think that it's absolutely the time for a ceasefire and to move on to the second phase of discussing a ceasefire that's been broken just in the last few days. But could you tell us your perspective, Abla, on where we are and what should take place now, and whether, to the question that was set, whether economic and political reconciliation can take place simultaneously, whether they need to be sequenced, and your perspective on the conflict.
Thank you very much, and thank you for bringing back the focus to the focus of the session. Okay, as stated. Let me just start by saying that the title of this session is Beyond the Crisis, What to Do. Okay, we are definitely in the middle of the crisis now that Israel stopped the ceasefire and is back to attacking and killing again. Attempts to have ceasefire based on temporary ones is not addressing the roots of the problem. This is the only thing I agree with my neighbor here. Okay, but what is not being addressed is the real cause behind this whole thing. All the talk is about that everything started to happen from the 7th of October, from the attack of Hamas. Hamas are the bad guys. Let's get rid of them. The reality is that things started 70 years before with the occupation of Palestine, and all Palestinians have been living in all parts of Palestine in an open prison. Okay, so it was not a lovely life. It was not a happy support of the Israelis for the Palestinians. Those are the realities. So back to your questions on whether political reconciliation, economic reconciliation can take place. What is happening right now on stopping the ceasefire and resuming the attacks proves that the political reconciliation needs to come first before anything else. Okay? Political reconciliation in the sense of having a political solution for the reality, for the roots of the problem, admitting the rights of the Palestinians for the land, and going about it in a completely different approach. If what happened on the 7th of October is described as being barbaric, okay, what do we call the killing of 45,000 people and 110,000 people injured, and genocide and ethnic cleansing and the violation of human rights and the war crimes that took place? So let us not dwell on this part, but let us say that a political solution for the situation needs to be reached, ideally, before talking about any economic restructuring of Gaza. Okay? This is the first best solution. But if the first best solution is not happening, and it's going to take a very, very long time for agreement to take place, especially with the U.S.'s position with unconditional support for Israel, no matter what they do, okay, then the second best would be to try and have political reconciliation and economic reconciliation happening together. But for this to happen, it needs to be based on very clear principles. Principle number one, that the Palestinians have the right to the land. Principle number two, that Gaza is an integral part of Palestine. There is no such thing as forced displacement, and there has to be two-state solution. These are the premises. There has to be an agreement on those premises for anything to start. And I think a good example for trying to start something that sort of joins the political and the economic reconciliation is the initiative that was done by Egypt and that was announced on the 4th of March in the extraordinary Arab League meeting. Okay, this plan is talking about recovery and reconstruction of Gaza in 5 years. First 6 months as the first phase for cleaning things, and then 5 years afterwards, and with a cost of about $53 billion. And the premise, okay, and the starting point is that there is no such thing as displacement or taking Gaza, taking the Palestinians out, or ignoring that Gaza is part of Palestine. This is the type of initiative that needs to take place, and it needs a big role by the Arab countries in order to do it. Of course, a supportive role by Europe would help a lot. A change of position for the US could also help a lot by seeing the right of the other side, not just looking at one side and the eradication of Hamas as being the thing. The whole war has been looked at as if it's Israel and Hamas, two powers of equal size, attacking each other, and this is how it goes. It's not the case at all, okay? It's one state occupying the land and a segment within the Palestinians, okay, who reacted to things that happened before. I'm not saying that what they did is right. It is totally wrong. But what the Israelis did is way worse, okay? And the situation that we are in right now is very bad. There will never be proper economic reconciliation in the region, proper relationships between everybody, except by solving the root problem, which is giving the Palestinians the right to the land and live in an honorable way in the two-state solution. Anything other than that is not going to work.
Thank you. Again, it's tremendously valuable to have very passionate and real perspectives and diverse ones on one panel. I'm glad that you raised the question of the U.S. We know that there is a desire and a push to have not only this conflict, but also the conflict between Russia and Ukraine resolved, and there is a long-standing question as to whether you can resolve a conflict until the root causes have been addressed for both sides. And so it's possible that the U.S. is kind of pushing up against a brick wall in terms of its ambitions. Question mark for you, Ambassador Rudolph. Not only your perspective on U.S. strategy, perhaps, but especially on Europe's role. Many people think Europe has been largely absent from this part of the world since October 7th, 2023, and perhaps before. But perhaps you could feel free to respond to what you've heard, but to give us your perspective.
Well, thank you. First, I won't be able to entirely object to this objection you just quoted, but let me start by saying, look, for us, the Middle East is our immediate neighborhood. It's, you know, it literally borders on Europe. And I might add also, living in a country in the center of Europe, when we talk about Middle East being our neighborhood, it's not just looking at the map. It's, you know, in our cities, you know, the Middle East citizens, they are our neighbors there. So we are immediately affected by everything that happens there. And on the other hand, we try to contribute what we can. But I think we also have to be honest and say there is no such thing as Europe-Middle East relations, simply because it's rather the addition of a whole complex web of bilateral relations, historic relations, individual views in European countries of the region, of countries in the region. And of course, if we're honest, what doesn't help is that the institutional setup to define a European foreign policy is far from perfect, to put it mildly. There's the third factor, which you alluded to already, is that Europe right now is focused, you could say refocused on its own security in a way it hasn't been in many years and decades. So that simply draws attention and resources. Having said that, I think what is clear is certain political stances that have held, like Europe's support for a two-state solution. One could also add humanitarian support for Gaza has been substantial from Europe, including, by the way, from my own country, which is one of the largest donors. And if you want to look for a ray of hope, if you like, in this, is that what I see right now is Europe sort of realizing we have to shape our own foreign policy in a way we weren't used to, thanks, by the way, you know, simply to the outsized role the US has played in Europe for decades. We're reviewing that, and I would hope that this also can make us a stronger and more effective actor in the Middle East, contributing to peace there.
Would you like to comment on U.S. policy, or I'll come back to the entire panel, perhaps, on that? Yeah, good. Juana, your perspective on what you've heard on where Europe is, where Europe should be on this, and anything you'd like to add to what you've heard from our first four speakers.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think there's a paradox and the tension that needs to be resolved when it comes to the EU's role, and that is, on the one hand, what I'm hearing also at Raisina here and the debates that have been taking place outside of Europe is that the more unpredictable the Trump administration becomes in the US, the more demand there is for an EU role, especially in the Middle East. And I think this is crucial for the EU. Indeed, I would agree with the ambassador that a window of opportunity exists in the fact that the EU seems to at least have started to wake up to the reality that we need to shape a much more active foreign policy. Until now, we were trapped in the dilemma of whether the EU had ever been meant as a geopolitical actor, or the mantra of the peace project, which is strictly focused on itself. And I think we're finding that even if we want to be a peace project focused on itself, we need to do that by focusing outside of ourselves as well. Not just because the Middle East are our neighbors, but also because all of these conflicts are related. And we see more and more now with the Washington policy that whether we're talking Ukraine or we're talking the Middle East or other unresolved issues around the globe, they're all connected, they're all part of, let's say, a sort of a grand negotiation, which of course has its component parts, but they're still very tightly related. So the EU will not be able to defend its interests when it comes to its immediate neighborhood and to Ukraine, for instance, by being absent from the other relevant theaters in the world. Obviously, I do not think this is a matter of trying to compete with either the US or China or other powers. It is a matter of leveraging strategic advantage, which we do still have, at least as a major contributor financially, economically, to both economic development in these regions, cooperation in very specific sectors, and then since we are going to play a role in that, you cannot do that unless you also shape the negotiations. So for me, this is the imperative for the EU to try and play a much more geopolitical role. And one of my Indian friends that I met while being here was saying, would you quit whining in the EU because you're looking at yourselves and what you have done and you're dissatisfied and it's legitimate. But we who are looking at this geopolitically, we look at you as what you could do if you made up your mind to do it. And that is very geopolitical in a way because it's all about power projection, not necessarily about how you genuinely affect it. And I think the EU needs to learn to play that game. The only fear that I have is that we have never been good at dealing with two crises at a time. And the main one right now for us, obviously, is Ukraine. So I fear that just as we should be picking ourselves up to try and look more globally, we might actually be more focused in our immediate neighborhood.
Thank you. It does, for better and for worse, feel like it's, unfortunately, that it's a marginal issue, Europe's role. It's a shame to say it, but it does feel like it's not kind of where the problem is. I would like to get, before we come to the audience for questions, I would like to hear from the panel, and especially from those of you who are very much knowledgeable about the United States. It's not the elephant in the room. It is the sort of, it is the energy in the room, for better, for worse, for whatever people's views are. What is your view of how things have changed since January 20th? How is U.S. strategy affecting the conflict? And what would you advise, or what are you advising?
Well, let me start and say I wish it would gone after the Houthis back when I was a Central Command commander, and we could have plinked them a couple of times, and they never would have even approached the capital of Sana'a. But we failed then, and then we didn't support the Emiratis and the Saudis when they had the port of Hodeidah within reach. Ultimately, that ended up not well, and we were inadequate in our response to them disrupting one of the major maritime arteries of the world, forcing them to go all the way around Africa and so forth. So I'm actually pleased to see that. I'm pleased to see the tougher stance on Iran, which I hope will prevent conflict. You know, the way you deter conflict is make sure that the potential adversary realizes you have the means and the willingness to use them, and you will. And when we have done things like the Syria red line that was not a red line, that cost us out in the Taiwan Strait, by the way. When we did the withdrawal from Afghanistan, that was unnecessary because the cost in blood and treasure was very sustainable. That sent and then the way it was conducted, that sent a message to President Putin that we likely would not respond as forcefully as we did. By the way, I am non-political in the U.S. I don't even register to vote, much less vote. I talk to members of either party, including the current administration, the past one. So these aren't politically informed. These are as objective as I can make it. So in certain respects, I'm very pleased to see. I do think we should be doing more in Lebanon. I do think we should be doing more in Iraq in a very skillful way. But let me then respond. I'm actually sympathetic to the two principles that you stated. But there's a reality here. We're talking about reality. You cannot reconcile with those who are irreconcilable. This is why I made the point. You have to assess. When we started the surge in Iraq, the two big ideas were first, secure and serve the people. We can only do that by living with them, gated communities. Second one was promote reconciliation. We cannot kill or capture our way out of an industrial strength insurgency. We have to reconcile with as many as we can. The third was pursue the irreconcilables even more relentlessly than we have been. Those are the core of what we did. We had an entire intelligence element created to identify whether certain individuals and certain groups were reconcilable or not. My assessment is that Hamas is not reconcilable. And so I think we need to be very careful to think that something can be done if, again, you don't achieve the three objectives that Prime Minister Netanyahu, I believe, rightly put out, and then add the fourth one that is critical as well, because without that you have no hope for the people who actually have lived in Gaza. You cannot accomplish political, economic, or reconstruction if you don't have security. Only the Israelis can achieve security. The Arabs are not going to achieve security for Israel. And again, these other ideas of how you might resolve this, I just don't find entirely realistic.
Thank you.
And then we should point out that Hamas actually was getting extra worker visas. They were getting new opportunities. The money was going in. They actually had a relatively good, certainly compared with what Hamas has brought onto them. And Hamas has owned it. You know, the Israelis left in 2005. Hamas won an election that the Americans foolishly insisted on holding. Hamas won, and that was the end of the other elements of the Palestinian Authority, and they've had it ever since. So they had some opportunities, and I won't even go back into the failure of the Palestinian Authority to take the offers by the two different Ehuds, Ehud Barak and especially Ehud Olmert, which enormous concessions from the Israelis that I don't think we'll ever see offered again, unfortunately.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to come in just specifically and concretely on this question of U.S. strategy under President Trump? And then I want to come, there are two questions at least on this table.
Yes, first of all, I think the new administration policies are very clear. Maybe somebody can dispute them, but all the ones that are going to criticize the U.S. administration new ideas and policies must look at the past and see how they fail with all their theoretical proposals. Secondly, I don't think that this administration will be fooled by slogans that we heard already on this stage, talking about Gaza Strip as an open jail. And just to remind the audience that Gaza has a border with Egypt, and I don't hear the honorable colleague on my right stating anything about...
Respectfully on the panel, please, for the purpose of the dialogue.
I said the honorable colleague on my right...
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Okay, stating anything about, you know, for a jail you need to have walls, but to the best of my memory, there is a border between Egypt and the Gaza Strip. Israel withdrew from Gaza 2 decades ago, so there is no jail, and the fact that we continue to supply electricity, water, work, money, and everything else was something that now we are blamed for, and I can't understand how. Secondly, I think you have mentioned something about, yeah, I mean, you are looking at the watch when you're looking at me all the time. I didn't see that level of understanding to other speakers, but I respect that. So in the second comment, because I cannot really develop an argument here about the new policies, I will just mention that something that bothered me on the moral basis. There is casualties or a certain, somebody throw a number of 40,000 casualties in Gaza Strip, etc. So, but facts must be, first of all, this is Hamas figures, and if somebody see in this audience that Hamas is a reliable terrorist organization that you should buy figures from, I would say that you wait a little bit further and you'll find out. Secondly, somebody forgot to mention the numbers of terrorists among these 40,000. And let's assume, according to Hamas figures, that there are at least between 15,000 to 20,000 terrorist activists who raped, burned children in their home after tie them up with their families, shoot their mothers in front of the kids, and those guys are dead. So among the tiers, you know, that you have for the all 40,000, which is also theoretical number, at least half of them are active terrorists. Just remind me.
The reason I hold the line is only because we can't resolve it on the panel.
Last sentence.
Thank you.
Remind me in what war you have a better proportion between civilians that were among terrorists and the casualties were the better ratio. All international experts like Spencer.
Thank you. I do want to come to the audience, just only because the question was about U.S. policy. And also because I just don't think that we can resolve this is a very important contested, there's lots of contestation, but we can't resolve it here. So to the extent that we can really focus on the questions that now are going to come from the audience, please keep the questions succinct because we're in limited time. And if you can, I was going to come to you first because I think the first question, and then I'm going to come to you first, if that's okay, so that we bring the audience in. And then
just answer your question. I mean, I simply want to bring it
please.
back to the focus of the session. That's it.
Please, go ahead.
Okay.
Please.
All right.
And then we'll come to you.
Your question was about the U.S. policy.
U.S. policy.
Okay, I think the U.S. policy is not correct in the region, and I think the U.S. policy is bringing China as a bigger player in the region, in the rapprochement of Iran and Saudi, which seems to be working. This policy, which is completely biased toward Israel, is actually reducing the role of the U.S. in the region, and this is not good for them. At another level, the U.S. policies in general have been actually disrupting the multilateral system significantly, and so single-handedly is going to make BRICS stronger global south with a louder voice. Last word, irreconcilable Hamas. I'm not sure who is irreconcilable. Is it Hamas or is it Netanyahu, really? If you're talking about really reality, security comes with peace and solving roots of problems, not with arms and weapons and killing.
Rainier and Juana, are you okay to wait on the U.S. question and we'll come back? Okay, please, the gentleman here. And if you say who you are and state your question quite succinctly, please.
My name is Nasser Kamel. Well, quick, I mean, I didn't think the gentleman, the two gentlemen did answer the question of the session. Beyond the crisis, prospect for peace. What I heard is a military political strategy to uproot Hamas. That's a comment. The question is actually, who disagree with that approach? Hamas, nobody in the Arab world questioned that the future of Hamas, the future of Gaza should be without Hamas, including the Arab plan that was mentioned before, which has a governance component by a multinational force, a UN-sanctioned force, and that could be a road towards a new political architecture for Gaza that could lead to a longer-term solution in Gaza and beyond in the West Bank. But what I heard from the general is a very knowledgeable, tactical, military approach to deal with the Palestinian question. I don't think the Palestinian question would be dealt with in terms of military tactics and not dealing with
strategy. Strategy.
I'm not a journalist, so
excuse
my ignorance in this. So I would like to hear, especially from the honorable Israeli diplomat and General Petraeus, how do they see the future of the Palestinian territory in 5 years or 10 years?
Thank you.
Do they believe in a two-state solution, or it is just about is it about keeping the status quo while uprooting Hamas, which we are all for it, and keeping the Israeli occupation of Gaza and the West Bank?
Before you answer this, I want to take a couple of more questions, but I think there is a sequencing question at the heart of your comment, and if we can ask the sequencing. I read as you were implying that there does need to be a sequence, but perhaps you're suggesting a different sequence. Please, the gentleman right here, and then we'll come to you. We could take these three questions and then come back. Go around.
Thank you, Itonde Kakoma. Just on the reference to agreements that don't reflect realities on the ground being unrealistic, I wonder if you could, particularly General Petraeus and Director General Idan Bar-Tal, reflect on the implications of an agreement that I've understood has lasted now 46 years, the Camp David Peace Accords, which was not just about reflecting the realities on the ground, but creating perhaps future dynamics as well and future realities. Firstly, what are the lessons that could be drawn for the longevity of that agreement? And secondly, what are the implications or ramifications of the current situation on the sustainability of holding that agreement together? Thank you.
And then one more right here at the same table. Clearly, at 40 minutes is highly inadequate to talk about the Middle East. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Magdalena Kirchner. I work for the Stiftung Mercator in Germany. I do have a question, Mr. Bar-Tal, to you, because before October 7th, or before you were in charge of regional cooperation, and because I have to look at, or I'm looking at the planet part, I want to ask also about the future, but about Israel's role and place in the region, obviously, which is well, key for the future of Israel as well. And just before October 7th, there were a lot of initiatives on energy security. So I would like to ask you, with regards to Jordan, Turkey, and Saudi, where normalization is obviously, well, either stopped or halted, limited space of political leaders in these countries is limited through the war. How do you manage, either you can share with us how did you do it, what can you actually do, how is cooperation possible, or what's your vision on how to come back to energy security, climate cooperation, topics that are key for the future of Israel and the neighborhood?
Okay, just so 3 questions. We only have 5 minutes. We have 5 people. 2 of them are clearly much more, 3 of them, 3 are clearly much more directly engaged at the moment, but I want all of you to be able to speak. So maybe I'll let the 2 people at the end say something before I come to where I think we're going to end up. Would you like to take one of those? Please don't try to answer all 3. Just take one.
Sure. Yeah, well, I would actually just very briefly make the point, because obviously the EU's role is much more marginal in this. But I do believe that it could play 2 roles. One, contribute precisely to that development vision, that the longer-term development vision, including by working with the administration in Washington, as difficult as it might be. But the EU is still the one that is able to set aspirational standards, even if we ourselves don't always meet them. But we can set those standards, and still, when other third countries are looking at the Euro-Atlantic community, they'd rather be like the EU in terms of development rather than the US model. So that's one. And the other thing is, precisely because we are more marginal, we could play an interesting mediator role among the greater powers active in the region.
Thank you. Rainier?
Look, last night in this room, the former Luxembourg Prime Minister Xavier Bettel said that if in the 1950s you had asked the French and the Germans if they want to be friends, they would probably have said no. What he was he's probably right, and what he was alluding to, of course, was that essentially the US at the time told us Europeans, now be friends and make peace. And to your question, this is to me, I can't quite see this, how the US is going in here as a mediator, sort of in the Camp David approach, the gentleman reminded us of a minute ago, or actually with the ambition to try to impose an order. And that to me is an open question.
I think it's an open question for most of us right now, exactly what the strategy is coming out of the Trump administration on this question. Abla.
I think I'll leave the remaining minute for the time.
Okay. Please.
So first of all, I think that the new administration, they have a fresh approach to solve old problems with new thinking, and we have to be a little bit more patient in order to evaluate it. As the General Petraeus said, strategically they understand where is the center of the problem. For example, Iran, they really identify who runs the show or the radical show in the Middle East. So it's one, I think, a very important principle that we have to follow. With regard to the not very near future, but follow on, we are optimistic. First of all, during the war, we have experienced that it's the first time that the Abraham Accords were a test. And we found, and that led me to be optimistic about development in the Middle East if we'll be patient and will really touch the right problems. So the Abraham Accords is really encouraging. I think the changes in Lebanon could also encourage us. The Oslo Accord that you have rightfully mentioned, you said the Cape David. No, 1979. You mean with Egypt? Yes.
There are lessons in terms of durability, but also ramifications.
Yes. So first of all, the old peace agreements and the new peace agreement, the Abraham Accords, give us a good base to look into the future. But this time, I think the Middle East will be more shaped by the camp of moderates versus the camp of radicals, and I think the US policy will support and provide the positive incentives to the moderate camp, rather negative incentives to the radicals, and I think that what is ahead of us, and I think that we should be cautiously optimistic.
Thank you very much. General.
Well, thanks for the last word. First of all, I mean, the lesson of the Egypt-Israel is have moderate leaders on both sides who are willing to make some compromises with a Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon in the White House. And unfortunately, we don't have any of that. The story of everything since then has been missed opportunities by both sides, I might add. And we've been in a position for the last, 20 or more years where every time you look at it, they say, well, the Palestinian leader can't make compromises, but, the prime minister, his coalition will fall apart, so we can't. Although, there was an opportunity at Camp David with Clinton. There was an opportunity with Ehud Barak and an opportunity, especially with Ehud Olmert, that I think is one that Palestinians will look back on with great rue. As to this particular issue we're talking about here, let's always come back to Mr. President, Mr. Prime Minister, what do you want to accomplish? Destroy Hamas, I agree. Keep Hamas from governing again, I agree. Get the hostages back. And I would add, and you also, Mr. President, need to provide a better life for the Palestinian people in Gaza without Hamas in them. And with respect to a multinational force doing this, there's no multinational force that can be assembled that is going to go in and conduct a comprehensive civil military counterinsurgency campaign against Hamas. It has to be the Israelis, as much as they don't have the large forces, they don't have a counterinsurgency field manual, they haven't trained for it, they don't want to call up reserves, et cetera. I don't think there's any alternative if you want to come back to the objectives, and that's what you have to keep asking. And I think the objectives are right if you add the fourth one, and the way to go about that then is with the Israelis, as I've said, small bites at a time, work your way down. The minute you've accomplished one, you actually thin out the Israeli forces and move down further. They always control the entry control points because that's the fail-safe, if you will, that's the last big check as you move on down. There's going to be really tough fighting, but if you want to achieve the objectives, again, Mr. President, Mr. Prime Minister, whatever, this is how I would lay out that you would do it, and I have not seen any alternative. I've also seen no alternative to the two-state solution. The problem has been that instead of preventing more obstacles to the two-state solution over the intervening years when we excused the political leadership on both sides, there are more obstacles, and we also haven't supported the development, nor have the Palestinians, the development of the kind of institutions, education system, end pay for slay, and all the other problems that have created issues on that side either. So, and it's gotten much more problematic rather than easier over the years as a result. But Gaza is separate from that if it can be dealt that way, and it could actually be an example of what right is like if it's done to achieve the objectives that I've laid out, and then you promote, again, gradual interim governance, security forces. We should have been training, by the way, select Palestinians in the Jordan International Police Training Center from the very first week of this war, so there's something ready to go in there. In the interim, again, Arab forces will be going again. So, yeah, but I mean, we've lost well over a year as a result of that, obviously. But that's how I'd lay that out.
Thank you. Not an easy discussion to have. I deeply appreciate the strategic. Well, I think for some people it's actually quite a hard conversation. Clearly, you were a tremendous person to begin and end with. Thank you so much, General Petraeus. Thank you very much to each of you. That was a wonderful panel and a tough one. Thanks.
May I request the panelists to please pose for a photograph? And may I request all the participants to please head to Darbar. We'll be starting a plenary session shortly.
Pictures.